Hello everybody. We know a lot of how the survivors ended up in the Constant, and roughly what they were doing before arriving here, but how about today we look at why the survivors are here in the first place? Why them over anybody else in the world? It's only explicitly said for very few survivors, so I'm going to explore some of my theories and reasonings for this merry band of idiots being dragged here. Let's start from the top and in chronological order with Wilson. You'd think, since he's the poster boy and pseudo-main character of this game, that we'd know the most about him. Well, sadly we've not been told explicitly why Maxwell chose to bring Wilson to the Constant, but I do have a theory. Hear me out. I feel like either Maxwell or the shadowy influence controlling them prey on people who are not as mentally or emotionally stable as the average person. Be it that they're easier to trick and influence into the Constant, or perhaps they have an increased sensitivity to whatever powers that may be which dwell within the Constant. To cycle this back to Wilson, I feel like he was chosen by Maxwell since he sees himself as some kind of underappreciated great scientist. And to his credit, man can do some science, but his willingness to, and I quote, conquer this world with the power of his mind is probably the exact amount of insane that the Shadows need in their domain. So they dangled the carrot of forbidden knowledge for him. As to why the Shadows would want somebody like that in the Constant to begin with, perhaps they feed off emotions and strife. The Shadow monsters manifest when a character themselves are struggling with insane thoughts, so I think it's a somewhat healthy connection to make. Or maybe it could be something as simple as Maxwell knowing Wilson would free him from the Nightmare Throne. But that entirely depends on what state Maxwell was in during the time of the whole snatching people on the surface. Let me know what you think about that. That was a somewhat long-winded one. Next up we have Willow. Now we know for a fact that Willow was working with or for the Shadows, not before being lambasted by them when she was a child. Her rampant pyromania could have been either planted there by the Shadows when she was young, so they could use her as an instrument of whatever wicked scheme when she grew up. So what does any of this have to do with why Willow ended up in the Constant? I feel like if we used the same reasoning as Wilson, we could gauge that she was such an extreme source of emotion, ready to perform as a pawn of the Constant. Or we could view it from a different lens that'll apply to a lot of the characters in this list. The Shadows didn't want a part of their influence and power running free around in the real world, and dragged Willow to the Constant where they could both keep her a secret and in control. Speaking of characters kept in the Constant as a loose end, we have Wolfgang. In his animated short, we see that William Carter, aka Maxwell, infuses Wolfgang with some wicked shadow magic to help him rescue him from the train car he was stuck underneath. The shadow magic he used was probably bound to Wolfgang, or even something as simple as Wolfgang saw what the Shadows were capable of, which led Maxwell to, many years later, as a pawn of the Shadows, drag Wolfgang into the Constant, either to keep another loose end tied up, or prey on his desire to be strong and mighty. Or because he's a big baby who gets scared easily. Either or. So, Wendy. I feel like she falls in the category of Wilson in a way, where she's in the Constant because she'd be easier to string along, except replace owning the world with science with a chance to meet your long lost sister again. I don't know and don't expect Wendy to have any psychic connections with the undead before she was taken to the Constant, but it is something to consider. Oh, but we are forgetting something. She is Maxwell's niece. Say what you want about Maxwell and how evil he may be, but I don't see him dragging his own family into this mess he played a big part in creating. Willingly, that is. So it's possible that Wendy was brought to the Constant by the Shadows because of her connections with Maxwell, as some kind of punishment towards him, or maybe even to elicit a response from him. Keep in mind Maxwell also doesn't recognize Wendy and vice versa. And as we'll see later, Maxwell isn't above just dragging random children into the Constant. Next up we have WX-78. Why are they in the Constant? Because they were forced here by Wagstaff. Most likely. We see them falling backwards into the Constant as a certain Wagstaff looks on menacingly in their animated short, so it's safe to assume that they either fell in after a confrontation, or was forced in by Wagstaff, who we know has a fascination with the Constant, probably as some experiment that WX wasn't too keen on taking part of. But how about we consider if that is exactly what WX wanted to be a part of? What if it wasn't a confrontation, and maybe WX entered on their own free will? A perfect body designed in their image for the ultimate goal of whatever WX plans on doing with the moon magic. Now trust them over Wagstaff any day. What do you think? Do you think WX shared a common goal with Wagstaff, knew about the powers that be in the Constant, and wanted them for themselves? Let me know in the comments. Also, while you're down there, consider dropping a like or a sub if you've been enjoying this. Wicker bottom time. I'm going to put her in the loose ends category. In her animated short, we can see that their library has a lot of material based on nightmares and all things Constant, so it's incredibly likely that they orchestrated their whole plan of burning her library down via Willow and having Maxwell swoop in to quote-unquote save her and her knowledge. Either they had a use for somebody of her incredible levels of intelligence and curiosity, or didn't want anybody in the real world getting a full grasp on who they are. Though if we go with that theory, why didn't they stop Wagstaff? Another time. Woody might be a tricky one. We have hints that his curse was around before he was taken to the Constant, since Walter knows about the whole werebeaver thing before arriving, so that gives us a situation where he could be a loose end, if his curse is either shadow magic or lunar magic. Their reasoning could also be because he's such a unique person both mentally and physically, which would fit the role for characters that are easy to influence, offer him a place to solve his curse maybe. Saying that though, did Woody or even somebody like Wilson need to be tricked to come to the Constant? We've seen that the Shadows can straight up take people to the Constant themselves if they so deem fit, so that's why I think going after people like Woody because they're easy to take is only half of the story. Speaking of people just taken for the heck of it, let's talk about Wes now. Simply put, the reason he's here is pure accident. The Shadows, or Maxwell himself, had no use for him since he accidentally came here in Witherspoon's place. This does raise another question though. Why didn't they just send him back? Did he displease Maxwell so much by foiling their plans that he kept him here out of anger? Or maybe he's just a symbol that people can never leave the Constant, even if they're here on accident. Ah, William Carter, Maxwell's demon himself. We all know why you're here, don't you? You put your nose where it didn't belong, you tried to dabble a wee bit in some shadow magic and take control of what wasn't yours, and now, you're stuck here like everyone else is. Part of a grand scheme? Possibly, but originally pulled in here to take the role of a king, at least for a short while. Funny how we have the least to say about the most important characters, huh? Okay, now look me in the eyes and tell me Wigfrid is a stable person. Maxwell exploited her desires to headline once more, and now that the whole world is her stage, is providing a pretty good show for them. So yeah, she's certainly in the amusing camp for whatever Force took them. Unless they viewed her strength as an asset, perchance. An asset for what, though? You're trying to tell me that this whole conflict between Lunar and Shadow was orchestrated from the very beginning? That would be really cool if it was. Weber is absolutely a loose end they couldn't keep roaming around. On top of the whole emotional instability you'd come to expect from a human child merged with a spider from a different dimension. A 2-in-1 situation both in body and reasoning. Great job, Wagstaff and Maxwell. The second the news, or pretty much anybody catches wind of what happened to Weber, is the exact moment the lid on the whole Shadow situation and the Constant slowly starts to get lifted open. I mean, you'd hope so at least. Ah, poor Wily can never catch a break, can he? We know incredibly little of why he would be brought here, but it's safe to assume that Maxwell exploited his connection and wishes to help his mother and used that to drag him into the Constant. Are the Shadows, Maxwell himself, so cruel to want to bring somebody with separation anxiety who deeply cares for their mother into a world where they can't ever escape? Well, if my whole they feed off emotions and strife theory is correct in any form, then Wily is going to be a prime source of the stuff. Poor guy. Time for our first DST exclusive character, Winona. She's in the rare category of kind of is here by accident. She was never dragged into the Constant in the same way the other survivors were, but wasn't not dragged into the Constant at the same time. In her animated short, we can see her getting yanked into the Constant by Charlie, who, take note, is in her feral form, meaning this took place either during Maxwell or Wilson's reign. Since it was feral Charlie dragging them into the Constant, I'd think it's safe to assume she had no direct motive or control other than a primal instinct. I doubt Charlie would want her sister in the mess she found herself in, unless she did to help save herself. Let's also not forget, Winona ending up in Wagstaff's factory was a direct result of her tracking her sister down ever since her disappearance, so her being taken is far from an accident in Winona's eyes. Ah, Wartox. He's simply here because he wants to. And that's it. No external force is keeping him here, and no external force took him here. He's purely here for his own amusement, silly little funnies. Hey, I wonder if Wartox is able to just, rescue the survivors, but chooses not to. I'd hope not, because that would make him a massive jerk. Anyway, yeah, his reason of why is simply why not. Oh, I almost forgot about Wormwood. Yeah, he's here because, he lives here. This is his home. Okay, well, technically speaking, his home used to be the moon, and then the plateau of Hamlet, but now it's the forest. I mean, the same could be said for all the survivors, but I digress. Wormwood is a constant native and has no reasons as to why he's here other than born here. But as to why he's in the forest with the survivors, if you see my other videos, you know I have a cheeky little theory that Charlie directly brought him here because of his connections to Alta to help aid her goals. The same applies to Work too. This is her home part, not the connection to Alta part. She was either born in the marshes of the forest or the quagmires where the gorge takes place. Either way, the Constant is her home. Always has been, and most likely always will be. With how Moans were in the Constant even before Maxwell got here, she's most likely been outside of any kind of influence, be it Shadow or Luna, for a long time. Besides the Gnaw, of course. Whatever that was. Walter found himself here as a complete accident. He sprung a somehow still active trap that was originally set for Woody when he came across his cabin in the rural Canadian wilderness looking for rumours. There's no reason why he's here, besides a simple accident fueled by the curiosity of the werebeaver. So if the werebeaver was a machination of them, then they could have indirectly influenced Walter's arrival years in the making. Maybe that's why the trap was still set. Ooh. And lastly on our little list of whys, we have Wanda. She's once again another pseudo-accidental character. She landed in the Constant after an ill-fated run-in from the shadows caused by her time and reality bending watch to break, and somehow landing her into the Constant. Sure, it was an accident that she ended up here, but seeing that she was being hunted by the shadows for owning clockworks made out of nightmare fuel and fuel sight, the reason why she would have been here, be it not an error on her part, is her tampering with forces she really shouldn't have. Say it with me now, another loose end that needed to be tied up. And it tied up with this wonderful curse that forever binds her to a rapidly aging death. Oh, and a lifetime in the Constant. How tragic. And that's all the reasons I could think of as for why the survivors are here over anybody else in the world. Their emotional instability, their mental instability, the dabbling in forces they shouldn't have, and in a lot of cases, pure accident. And just being born in the Constant too, I guess. Let me know what you think about this, any points I missed and theories you may have, and yeah, take care everybody. I'm going to I guess I gotta go work on that Wagstaff video now, huh? Or will I?